Give Bob Hauser. I'm gonna let Bob Hauser talk to you for with some announcements, and then come back to me, and I'll introduce Mike, and we'll get going.
Sure. Welcome, everybody. We currently have 79 participants, probably our highest number yet. So thank you for joining. Tonight is our first all Zoom meeting. I'm still working out some of the kinks here, so bear with us. If you are joining, please put your speaker on mute or audio on mute. And we're going to try to keep our presenter, Mike Weis, as a presenter. If too many people are talking or off mute, then this, the video is going to jump around between users. If you have any questions, please put those in chat, and we'll get to those at the end of the Q&A. And that's it. Go ahead, Marta.
All right. We're happy to have Mike Weis here with us today. Mike is the owner of the Kalamazoo-based landscape company, Dropseed, Native Gardens and Ecological Restoration. He's been gardening with native plants since 2005. He works seasonally for Hidden Savanna Native Plant Nursery and volunteers as an ecological steward for Southwest Michigan Land Conservancy and Stewards of Kleinstuck. Mike is, as a side note, also an accomplished percussionist, composer, and conceptual photographer, and we are excited to have him here today. He has just a wealth of information and experience about designing native landscapes with purpose. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Mike, to get us going on that topic. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm going to take away this bar on the side here. There we go. Let me see if I got that right. All right. I think I got that. So yeah, thanks for adapting to our last minute change of plans. It would be nice to be in person and get to chat with everyone and see everyone's faces. So I'm just trusting that you're all out there. It's nice that I don't have to white knuckle it all the way from Kalamazoo. I did that last month to the Stewardship Network conference in a snowstorm, and it wasn't fun. So thank you for switching over to this online version. All right, so yeah, let's get started. I started Dropseed Native Gardens a few years ago after I moved to Kalamazoo. But before that, I was just an amateur native gardener since 2005 is when I started, and it started with this garden that you're looking at here. So since I started the business, I'm almost at about 100 yards that I've installed. So that's kind of nice to go back and talk about the very first one that I started experimenting with, and it's almost like a slideshow of a scrapbook in a way. I'm just lucky that I documented it all because there's a lot to talk about here. So I started this in 2005 and moved to Kalamazoo in 2020. So that's 15 years of working with this garden. I got the chance to see how it evolved and how it kept changing, whether on its own or through my wife and I, we're the ones who both started it, and I kind of took over after a few years, and she lost interest. So yeah, there are some things that if I had to do over, I would do completely different, and some things that I would have rolled with it still. So I think the trial and error, it's kind of what this topic is on, is super important because experiencing these kinds of gardens with while you're in the trenches of it is the best way to learn. However, there are some mistakes that I made that I don't wish upon my worst enemy. And so I want to go over some of those so that would help you to avoid wasting your time and money. But again, I think the trial and error, the experience is well worth it rather than, following some description in a book, even though that wouldn't work either. Okay, a few things about this yard that I'm going to talk about today is it's a typical city-size lot in Chicago, on the northwest side of Chicago. The only thing that's atypical about it is that the house is set far back on the lot, so we didn't have a backyard. We have a front yard to work with. Our backyard is actually a Chicago park, which was nice. But so that is kind of important to mention because we're dealing with a front yard garden, so that changes things a little bit, and it has, especially when it comes to design and aesthetics. I had a backyard rogue garden. What I called it is just an area where I threw a lot of the more aggressive natives. I didn't really care what it looked like. I just wanted to throw as many plants in there and see what happens. And I have a garden like that in my backyard in Kalamazoo, but my front yard, I'd like to put a little more effort into the design of it. I call it an equal balance of form and function, not just function. I got into native plants through the whole idea of ecological function. I wanted, to utilize my space and make my own yard have some purpose to it, and not just more resource intensive lawn like it was prior to us converting it to a native garden. So that's why I'm going to be focusing quite a bit on design. We're going to get into some more kind of design theory a little bit. But again, I'm all for the throw whatever you can at the wall and see what sticks if you have it in the backyard. But for the front yard, we're going to talk a little bit more about aesthetics. Okay. Uh-oh, it's not forwarding. I don't know why. Oh, there we go. That was strange. We had the problem earlier with that. So to begin any garden, what I still do is I kind of have a list of garden goals in mind. And for example, in this yard, this is a photo of my wife cutting the lawn for the first time shortly after we moved into the house. And one of our garden goals was that we didn't want to do this for very much longer. I just had no interest in maintaining a lawn. I didn't know what we wanted. We didn't know what we wanted to put in there. We just knew that we didn't want to cut grass. So that was a garden goal. But then my wife found out about Wild One's local chapter, and we went to a presentation a woman gave on, I think the topic was getting your yard off grass, which I thought was a really funny title. And we came back really motivated and excited. Again, we didn't know what we were doing, but we had a few garden goals, and one of which is that we had some function in mind. We wanted to increase biodiversity in our yard. We were just starting out as beginning birders, so we wanted to expand the bird habitat and pollinator habitat. We wanted to reduce noise and pollution and sequester carbon. That's specific to this yard because that street behind her is a very busy street that, especially during rush hour, it backs up and it's ugly and it smells and it's dangerous. So we wanted to create kind of a living fence, so we would have a natural screen from that road, so we could sit quietly in our front yard and create a beautiful, interesting yard. Lawn to us, in addition to being resource intensive, we just figured it was just kind of boring and it had to go, and we wanted to do something different. Once we got the native garden established, we started noticing all these other benefits that we didn't really know about. And then we kept finding more and more. We thought that was kind of cool. And so these these are goals that I still keep in mind for my projects: conserve water, reduce stormwater runoff, improve soil quality, create a self-sustaining, resilient plant community. This is something I didn't really think about until I moved to Kalamazoo, and I started to meet a lot of people in the area who are ecologists and land managers and restorationists, and they taught me a lot about ecosystems and natural plant communities. And now that's all I think about. I kind of get obsessed with this whole idea, and it's the whole idea is you think about these spaces, even your yard, holistically, and trying to keep the components of a natural community intact. And that's what's going to keep it more resilient, because the plants work together and will be more self-sustaining. Be a positive ambassador for the native garden movement. I've walked by one too many quote unquote pollinator gardens that someone maybe had some initial motivation and enthusiasm for, but maybe scrapped and moved on, and they just left this kind of mess of a plot. And I don't think that's a very good advertisement for the native garden movement. And with that, I say make it fabulous and simple enough so future owners don't destroy it. This is something I think about a lot. I would really love for people to admire the garden, even if they don't know anything about native plants. They just see it and they think this is a fabulous garden. And then they, that's the hook, right? You bring them in, and then they can learn more about the whole ecology behind it, and there's your bonus. So, I don't, if it's going to be a task to maintain, or it's a bit of an eyesore and you sell the property, and more likely that the next person is probably gonna just turn it back to lawns. So we want to keep these around as long as possible. And I think the way to do that is to make them as beautiful as possible. Okay, so how are we doing on our goals? The photo on the left is taken shortly before he moved in. The for sale signs are still nailed to the catalpa tree. Kind of funny. And then off to the right, that's only after 3 years after install. And I should mention that the conditions in Chicago are quite different from what I work with now in Kalamazoo. I looked up the pre-settlement maps circa 1800 of this area, and it showed that it was originally a mesic black soil prairie. So that's very, very rich soil. It doesn't drain really well. It's pretty thick, so it's really rich. And in Kalamazoo, we're on a glacial moraine, so there's a lot of sand and gravel till, a little bit of loam, but for the most part, it's nutrient poor and it drains quickly. So very different soil conditions. The soil conditions in Chicago here on the right really lend itself to a very fast establishment of these plants. They grow fast, they grow tall, and that's interesting to me now in Kalamazoo. I was kind of getting impatient because these gardens weren't growing fast enough, but it's because it takes a little while for them because of the different soil conditions. So it looks great on the right, but like I was thinking about this. It's kind of like this garden didn't roll out of bed looking like this. There's a lot of work behind it before it had this really got this photo op. It got prepped for it. Behind the scenes, there's a lot of work going on to make it look that good. I'm weeding a lot. I'm staking up a lot of floppy plants. Fencing off a lot of the growth that is kind of falling into the sidewalks. It's falling into a driveway. I'm replenishing the mulch. I'm transplanting, moving things around. So what's up with all the work? I thought native gardens were supposed to be easy. I should mention that, they are pretty much, they're not easy, but if you do it, if you plan correctly and you prep correctly, it will make your life easier. make management a lot easier, especially considering what I went through, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. Again, here's another before and after. 2007 on the right, that's only 2 years after we installed the garden. I'm still impressed by how these things grow so fast. I almost forgot about that. Okay, so we're going to talk about some of my mistakes that I made and break it down into 3 different categories. The preparation errors, the mistakes I made in the design phase, which I basically didn't have a plan at all, and my maintenance errors that I continue to make mistakes for probably 10 years before I learned the correct way to deal with some of these things. So the prep errors, when we started this garden at the time, it's 2005, there isn't like a ton of information out like there is now on the web. There aren't many books. There's not really a roadmap on how to do this. So we kind of fell back on what we knew a little bit about gardening, and it was all vegetable garden. Both my wife and I grew up with parents who created very large vegetable gardens. So, and we kind of, shadowed that work. And when it came time to prep in this yard, what you do is you got to get rid of the lawn. And so we borrowed my father-in-law's rototiller, and we chopped the hell out of that lawn, which is great because you got soil and you could plant right away. 2 downsides to that. One is you have this massive biomass of sod that you have to dispose of that I didn't realize. That stuff's really heavy. And then the biggest concern and the biggest mistake we made is to violently disturb the soil. And I was thinking, if there's one thing that maybe people can walk away with this presentation, if they didn't learn anything, I want them to learn that you want to minimize soil disturbance. Rototilling is probably the most violent way to disturb the soil, because when you disturb the soil like that, it opens up the soil to pioneer weed species. It opens up the seed bank. Most commonly, in a case like this, there's probably going to be, it's just full of weeds. So it poked the monster for sure. And we had a lot of weeding every spring. Gosh, I did so much weeding. And then, to make matters worse, again, we followed conventional wisdom on vegetable gardening, really is what we're following. Soil amendment. We just went out and bought some compost at Lowe's or whatever and rototilled that in, not thinking, like, we just thought that's just what you do. This soil was already rich. It's black. It's really rich. It did not need amending. Now I don't do any soil amendment at all. This is different. This is a different kind of gardening that we're working with. It's ecological landscaping, and the more I learn about the different natural communities, the more I've learned that there is a plant list for pretty much any type of soil condition. So you just want to match the plant for the place, right? So don't try to stuff a plant that isn't made for this kind of soil into the spot and think, oh, I'm just going to change the soil and it's going to solve the problems. You want to adapt the plants to the original soil. I never amend soil. So that's how I work now. Okay, and then on top of that, we planted very sparse. These, we didn't know what we were doing. So we went to the plant sale and we're a little intimidated. So we didn't buy enough plants, and we just figured, well, we'll put them on 3-foot centers and hopefully they'll fill in. Nowadays, I plant on 1-foot centers. I plant very dense. It costs, it's an upfront cost, but it's worth it because you're going to get your garden to an establishment phase a lot faster. Then the plants are going to work with each other. They're going to fill in and they're going to create a green mulch, and the community is going to be intact a lot faster than if you slowly add plants. I totally am up for all for planting dense. If you don't have the money to plant that close, then maybe don't prep the yard as much as the yard, just work on smaller sections. Excessive irrigation. Somebody told us we should use these drip lines because they conserve water. I don't recommend them. The problem with that is they really, it's spotty, and when it does drip in, and it just really saturates the ground. We didn't really need that much water anyways. So I disturbed the soil, I enriched the soil, planted sparse, and irrigated the hell out of it. And basically I created a weed farm, really. Also, we had a lack of knowledge about plant behavior. We didn't know what went with what plant went with what kind of soil condition. So a lot of mistakes early on. Okay, so these are the consequences of those mistakes. On the left, excessively enriched soil and sparse plantings create monster plants that flop. I think probably most of us are familiar with the native plant flop. And then someone told me back in the day that, you know, what you need are grasses that hold up these floppy plants. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'm going to put some little blue stem in front of this here, in front of these asters. And well, that didn't work. And then I realized many years later, I'm kind of ashamed to admit, that what they're talking about is it's not the above ground support that it needs, it's the root support underground is what these plants need to stand up firm and be anchored in the ground. And then on the right, I took this photo the day we moved out of Chicago. So 15 years after making those initial mistakes, those problems are still haunting me. That's a prairie dog that's essentially swallowing up my son. It looks like I photoshopped those leaves. It might be like a Guinness Book of World Records prairie dock leaf there. It's crazy. I like this illustration by this fantastic book called Planting in a Post-Wild World because it shows the importance of a great base layer of graminoids, which is grasses, sedges, and rushes. It shows how they hold up these taller plants. This is Joe Pye weed, super tall plant. I had a problem with this baby flopping all the time. And that's because these roots in Joe Pye they're pretty deep, but they're a bit sparse. And if they didn't have this density of the fibrous roots from the grasses, they would splay outward like this. So then they topple over because there's no anchor to them. That's what it means by root support for above ground stability. Same thing that's going on here with the coneflowers. This dense fibrous roots are holding these guys in place. That's the community underground, super important. That's a mess. So this is what happened with our plan of planting sparse and hoping that it fills in. Yeah, it will fill in. There's that great quote from Aristotle. It says, nature abhors a vacuum. So it will fill in the gaps. I just think you'll be disappointed if you allow it to do it on its own rather than having a plan and putting them in pretty tight early on. So what happened was it did fill in with the native plants, but it's the real prolific cedars that filled in, the asters. And then back here, we had kind of a Canada goldenrod debacle. You know, Canada goldenrod finds its way everywhere. So it's creating a mess. And I love goldenrods and asters. They are keystone species, super important ecologically, but again, we're talking about a front yard garden. I think aesthetically, it would be wise to put these babies in the back a little bit and limit how many you put in. Give it some competition so they don't go crazy. I'm just speaking generally about goldenrods and asters. I don't want to get into each species, because there are definitely exceptions. But what happens is asters kind of look, I'm gonna be honest, they kind of look weedy until they don't, right? This one, you know, by September and October, they're beautiful, but again, not in the front. So design errors. I didn't really have a plan. No, not much of a design. But also where where you put the plants, that's the design. Even if you don't have a plan, it's still design. Improper plant placement, these asters in the front, as I mentioned. Right plant, wrong place. Right plant meaning it's a native plant, but it might not be suited for those conditions. And that's what I call clash of plant communities, which I'll talk about later. It lacks rhythm and harmony. It's not very coherent or legible. A lack of adequate base layer, chaotic seasonal layer, no coherent structural layer. And these last three are principles of matrix planting that I'm gonna touch upon a little bit. This is the whole idea of matrix planting, is a way to organize your planting in layers. So it's cohesive aesthetically and functionally. Improper plant placement. Look at October 2006. That's only a year and a couple of months after we installed the garden, and the asters are already in the front and falling over into the sidewalk. Not a good look, in my opinion. This photo looks fantastic. This looks like a successful garden to me. However, it's the right plant, again, in the wrong place. Because these plants didn't last long. Some of them only lasted a year, some maybe held on for 3 years. Pale coneflower, that disappeared after a year. The tuberosa, the butterfly milkweed, probably got 3 years out of that one. June grass didn't last a year. New Jersey tea, I was really sad to see that one disappear after a year. Sand coreopsis, what happened? Well, I'm trying to shove essentially plants that are meant for dry, well-drained soils, like in black oak savannas or even sand prairies, into a spot that's meant for more rich black soil prairies. Like, for example, the plants that did well, and they probably are still doing well in this garden. Purple coneflower likes those kinds of, likes that kind of soil. Rattlesnake master likes it. Cup plant loves it. Rudbeckia subtomentosa, I don't know the common name of that one, loves it. But these guys, no way. And at first I thought, well, are they short-lived? And then I did some research, and no, these babies, with the exception of sand coreopsis, are deep tap-rooted, and they are very long-lived. So I screwed up, not the plants. So I think it's important to learn which type of natural community or ecosystem your yard most closely resembles. And you could do this based on the kind of the structure of the soil. I just use an auger on my drill and drill into the soil and kind of get a sense of what the components are like. You could just kind of observe the way it drains when there's water. Does it pool up, or does it drain really quickly? Your sunlight conditions. If possible, pre-settlement vegetation records. You go down a rabbit hole with this baby. It's exciting. I'm kind of obsessed with those circa 1800 maps that MNFI has on their website. That's just, Michigan is by far leading the nation, I think, when it comes to those kinds of records. And then nearby remnant species. You know, if you're in a typical neighborhood, there probably aren't many remnant species around. If you're rural, you might be able to find some around. Typically, the only thing that remains are the canopy trees, the mature. In my neighborhood, there's a lot of gorgeous mature old oaks, and those oaks, depending on the oaks, will kind of give you what kind of oak. It will give you clues to what the original natural community was before it was drastically altered after European colonization. Okay, so the first one takeaway I want is minimize soil disturbance. The second one is right plant, right place, right plant, right place. So get to know your area, your conditions, and put the right plant for those conditions in that spot. Backing off a bit, taking a look at this garden. I'm sure this it's functioning great. There's a lot of bees, butterflies. It's a little tiny nature preserve, and it's working wonders compared to what it used to be. Aesthetically, it's not doing much for me, especially now that I'm kind of a snob about this stuff. So I think about. I think it lacks rhythm. It's incoherent. It's illegible. Everything is about the same height. It's just like a big old biomass it's spilling over into the sidewalk. I have a little fence here that you can't see because if I didn't fence it off, I'd be running over all these plants. This tiny little strip in between the driveway and the sidewalk it's a perfect spot for really short plants to show off. But what did I do? I put the largest plants I could think of in this spot, and they are falling all over the place. Here's another great illustration from that same book, Planting in a Post-Wild World. I love how they show the different layers. So this is what I want to touch on with the matrix-based planting, otherwise known as layers of a design plant community, as they call it. 3 different layers, and I added a 4th one, which I'll mention. So the first one, and this is the first layer that I start when I start a planting. I plant the structural layer first. I think I've heard other people do the ground layer first. I don't like doing it that way. I start top down, I go top down. So I plant the structural layer first. The structural layer, there, get in there. It didn't show up. Only 15% of the plant list is going to go towards the structural layer. These are large plants, shrubs, and or trees that form the visual architectural structure of the garden. Plants in this layer are long-lived, have distinctive silhouetted forms even during winter. It's essentially the garden skyline. So if you step back from your yard, take a look, there should be a structure to it, and the structure is gonna, the structural layer is gonna show off. The great landscape designer, Dutch, is he Dutch? Danish? I think he's Dutch. Piet Oldhoff. He says, a garden should look interesting even if you switch your digital camera mode from color to black and white. It should look just as interesting in black and white. And what he's talking about is structure. So there's going to be a balance there. In this example, this looks like a, I don't know, some sort of understory tree and Joe Pye weed. Give you an idea of the examples. Seasonal theme layer. This is the very popular layer in my Chicago garden. I would say probably 90%, maybe 80% of my plants went towards the seasonal theme layer, and I noticed that in many other native gardens. But really, you only need about 30 to 40% of your plant list will go towards this layer. You could probably push it to 50. I think I do that quite often. But these are the layer. This is the plants that are the fireworks. They are they bloom. Everyone gets excited about these kinds of blooms. So mid-height, seasonally flowering plants arranged in clumps, masses, and drifts, successionally blooming throughout the growing season. So from spring through fall, you'll have something interesting throughout those seasons, shifting through the season. It's also known as the primary plants. These first 2 layers are what is known as the design layers. And then the ground layer is the functional layer. This is the one that just does not get enough love, even though I think about 40 to 50% of your plant list should be going towards this layer. This is the base layer. Oh, I also want to mention the analogy about the matrix planting. Someone mentioned it's like a fruit cake. So in a fruit cake, the nuts and fruits are scattered through the dough. And the dough is the matrix. So in the ground cover layer, the ground cover is going to be the dough, and then the design layers are the fruits and the nuts. So these are low growing plants that function as living mulch, root support for taller plants, erosion control, they build soil, and they suppress weeds. This is the backdrop for all the other layers. It's the dough. It's also known as matrix plants. Mostly, typically people use graminoids for this layer. They're subtle plants, you know, short growing grasses, short growing rushes or sedges, something that has that really dense fibrous root structure, like I showed in that other illustration, that will hold up the taller plants. That is the base layer. And I added a fourth layer, filler plants. It's also known as scatter plants. And there's only about 5 to 10% of your plant list is going towards this. Essentially, it's something you want to get in, something that blooms fast in that first year. And anything that grows that fast and blooms that fast usually doesn't live very long. So it's either an annual, a biennial, or a short-lived perennial. And this is going to give you first year seasonal interest, even to buy you some time for when the longer lived plants like Baptisia or lead plant, they take forever to get going. So something to, you know, to hold off the neighbors. Okay, so I'm going to show you some examples of the different layers. And these photos are from the garden that I have now in Kalamazoo that's about 3 years old. So, yeah, I get carried away in the anime little option in this program. The structural layer plants. So again, tall plants that have a distinctive silhouette, are pretty firm, short, long-lived. If you want, I'm not going to go through each species. I think it's probably a good idea if you want to remember some of these to a screenshot. It's because I always think about that. I do it on other presentations. On a Mac, it's Shift Command 3. I don't know what it is on non-Macs. Anyways, I love Rattlesnake Master as a structural layer. Also, bonus, the deer don't mess with it. Tall blazing stars, like here, Savanna blazing stars pictured here. I'd like to use rough blazing star or even marsh blazing star. They are pretty firm, rigid, very interesting looking structure. The Baptisia, the white wild indigo, is just a gorgeous plant as long as you keep the deer away from nibbling off these amazing spikes. I love this plant. A lot of people think it's leggy, well, and so they choose the blue one. But I prefer this because when a plant is leggy, it's telling you something. It's meant to be surrounded by lower plants, especially grasses. So I love putting prairie dropseed underneath white wild indigo, and then you throw in some pale cone flower that I have in there. I think it's such a beautiful combination. And then here, this is a dwarf. I'm showing off my dwarf chinkapin oak because I planted this dinky little thing in the fall of 2020. It didn't do any growing until last spring. A deer came by and nibbled off the top, and for some reason, it shot up like 3 feet after that. And so I quickly got a cage around it to protect it because that was incredible. So what I wanted to do, I have the structure with these perennials, but in the long term, I have a successional plan in mind where I'm going to shift the conditions in my yard to be more like an oak savanna instead of a prairie. There aren't any canopy trees in my front yard, even though it faces southwest on a hill, and we're cooking in that house. So I want to get some shade in there. It's going to take a while. So that's why, I've got this successional plan. So eventually my structural plants are going to be the dwarf chinkapin oak, which is an understory tree. By the way, if you don't have enough space for your yard to support a big oak, put in a dwarf chinkapin, because then you get all the benefits of that keystone species without having to sacrifice space. I got a bur oak in there. It's going to take a while. I got a flowering dogwood and witch hazel. Okay, the seasonal list can be a lot longer than this. I just threw in there. There's a lot of options for the seasonal layer. Butterfly milkweed. If you have well-drained soil, I feel like you can't have too many butterfly milkweed. That it's one of my favorite plants because it blooms during the summer solstice is when I call it the summer solstice plant, and it just kind of dots the whole garden with that pop of orange, which is kind of a unique color in a prairie or a savanna. And then it also has a really interesting fall structure with its seed head. I love that plant. But the downside to it, one thing to know is that, for one, definitely do not overwater it. You'll kill it. You'll rot its root. But it also takes a while to emerge from the ground. Sometimes, I mean, I've noticed it not coming out of the ground until June 1st. So keep that in mind. I always keep that in mind, and I plant something that will vacate that spot early on before the butterfly milkweed comes out. Harebell, it's another plant that's kind of picky about its situation. It doesn't like competition from taller plants. It likes dry, well-drained soil, but boy, what a spectacular plant. That blue, and it's mystifying to me when it blooms. Sometimes it'll bloom early in the season, then won't do anything, and then come again later in the summer, and then maybe even, I had blooms in December one year. So weird. And the other interesting thing about harebell is that it greens up really early in the spring, so it can kind of act as a ground layer as well, as long as you don't have taller plants above it. Pale coneflower, I can consider this one even a structural plant if the garden is really short, because it has a really interesting structure. I think it's more interesting than the purple coneflower, and this one's longer lived, although it definitely needs well-drained soil. Yellow coneflower, everybody loves. Oh, right, the very important base layer, the ground layer. Essentially, most of the time people use grasses and sedges for this layer, but there are other options. Excuse me. My favorite, though, is prairie dropseed. I know a lot of people have a excuse me, a problem with it because it's very slow to establish, but it's worth it. It just has that beautiful fountain arch to it. It's just so elegant. And if you got a good base of it, you plant these by about on 2-foot centers, because they kind of really splay out. And then you could put so many plants in between there. It's a really great backdrop for all the plants that are going to pop up, especially liatris works really well with it. Pale coneflower works great with it. So prairie dropseed is a warm season grass, although it does emerge earlier than the other warm season grasses. But you want something, the whole plan of the ground layer is to cover the ground for as long as possible throughout all the seasons, if that, because that is gonna keep the weeds out. So it's, it's gonna occupy that space so nothing else gets in there. And then, it will minimize your management. So June grass is a cool season grass, which I usually combine those two. And again, that one needs well-drained soil as well. So that one greens up super early in the spring. And then once it starts to fade, then the prairie dropseed kind of takes over. It's really fascinating succession. I really like it. And this whole area in this photo, there's a lot going on in terms of ground layer. These are the pussy toes that really sprawl around if they have the space for it. This over here is prairie smoke, and I have another ground layer going on here, although I didn't put this in there. It got in as a Virginia creeper, which I keep an eye on. It can get carried away, so I don't remove it. I just keep it in check. Nodding onion, most people wouldn't think of it as a base layer matrix plant, but I've been using it as such because, again, it greens up super early in the season. So you're occupying that space. And it's low growing. So that's another thing. Like I don't really like tall base layer plants. I know a lot of people use little blue stem or Cytodes grama. I think it's too tall for a front small yard. I think it's a little messy. So I go with very, very short, as short as I can for base layer. It also functions as a seasonal bloomer too, because it will bloom late July, early August, and so the ground layer is the second to the last plants I add when I'm planting the whole garden. I put in the structure layer, then the seasonal layers, and then I add in, and then in the other spaces, I will throw in the ground layer plants. So basically I'm scattering knotting onion all over, when in the past I used to group them together, but I really like the look because it has a real nice cohesiveness. It's really subtle. And those little white pom-poms popping out all over the place is beautiful. Prairie smoke, probably the coolest plant, in my opinion, of our native plants. I love the bloom. I love the seed. I love the foliage. It's very unique. Everything about this plant is super unique. The bonus here is that the foliage is essentially evergreen. One thing to know about pussy toes and prairie smoke, though, they're a great ground cover if they're on their own, but they don't work well as a matrix choice. So a matrix choice meaning they're planting underneath the taller plants. These plants will not do well with that kind of competition. So I usually put these guys on the edge of a planting. The filler, these are the short-lived plants that are going to occupy some space and provide some visual interest in that first year. So they're either going to be short-lived perennials, biennials, or annuals. Landsleaf coreopsis, be careful with this one. It's a prolific seeder, so I use it sparingly, but it's so gorgeous, especially at that time of year. The way I handle it, though, is after it's done blooming, I trim the flower all the way back down to the base. And the base is great because that thing is pretty much evergreen as well. So again, occupying space. It just requires a little bit of management. If there's not much competition, this thing will really take over. Wild columbine, I feel like you can't have enough of this plant. I love it. Dotted horsemint is a biennial, but it's a mysterious biennial to me. Like it will flower in that first year and then disappear, and then maybe 3 years later pop up. Yeah, I don't really understand it, but it's such a unique plant. Really gorgeous flowers. It needs well-drained sandy soil. Rudbeckia hirta, I'm using the scientific name here because the Rudbeckias get very confusing. Black-eyed Susans, when someone say black-eyed Susan, I don't know really what they mean, because there's a perennial black-eyed Susan called Rudbeckia fulgida. So if you want a perennial, that's the one you choose. Rudbeckia hirta is a biennial, and it's used often in restoration, prairie restorations, because as an early successional plant. Okay, stepping back, these are all the layers. The structural layer aren't very out. I think I took this is 2 years ago. It's not, structural layer isn't obvious, but that's because I've got that successional planting plan in mind with the canopy, the bur oak. I did a 3-gallon pot, so it's going to take a while. I put a tulip poplar in there because, like I said, that house is way too hot and sunny, so I wanted to get some shade. So I chose the fastest growing native tree I could think of. And that baby has grown really fast. This one over here, the oak sapling, a squirrel gave that one to me. I'm always curious about where the little saplings pop out. And if it's in a good spot, I'll just leave it. And that is a perfect spot. I'd love to have a black oak right here someday. So I'm keeping an eye on that one. And then I have an understory trees. Oh, I forgot to title this one. It's a flowering dogwood. I have a witch hazel, the dwarf chinkapin oak, and a serviceberry way over here. And then I also added foundational shrubs. Red osier are on the front of the house, and on the side are 9-bark. So it's just going to shift from kind of like a prairie esque kind of planting to an oak savanna one eventually with multiple layers. Okay, let's get into the management layer. Oh, I've been talking too much. I'll try to speed up. Management errors. I pulled weeds instead of clipping. That's a problem, pulling weeds. Every time you pull a weed, you're disturbing the soil. So it's best not to pull a weed. And I was doing that, disturbing the soil, creating more weeds. And then I wanted to, how am I gonna, my solution to all these weeds is just to add more mulch. The more mulch you add, it breaks down, it enriches the soil even more. Allow too much leaf litter to pile up. Be careful with leaving the leaves. If you have very thick leaves like catalpas I had here, or oaks, I would recommend raking a few of them off, because if it's too thick, you're basically smothering your plants to death. This is how you clip at the base instead of pulling. This is what it looks like from a distance. I was being very critical of the planting, but really this is much more interesting than all this to me. This is very resource intensive. This is basically a tiny nature preserve in my yard. Wouldn't it be awesome if everyone else had that? I'm telling you, it's got to catch on. So this photo is taken from 2015, a Wild Ones tour that we did. And I've learned a bit after 10 years, and I'm course correcting, thinned out, moved or removed aggressive species, balanced the succession of blooms, because previously most of the blooming action was happening late summer into fall. So that's quite a bit of time of kind of having a boring garden. Diversified the plant heights, so there's a little more structure, more interest to the eye. Clumping the plants together instead of just willy-nilly throwing them in there. Cleaned up the path edges for navigation. Included structural layering, but I want to mention here, my structure for this garden is serving a dual purpose, which is to create that natural screen. This mussel wood serves as a fantastic screen. I think it's not utilized enough in landscapes. It has a really cool sculptural growth to the branching. But look at that density. You can't even see my house back there, and that's by design. I want it to be like that. Combined design forms. This gets a little nerdy into plant choice, we'll talk about later. So here, 2018, I'm thinking this is successful. This looks really good. And I don't want to get into too much, but I just want to give a shout out because this is U of M. There's these, the U of M environmental psychologist, Rachel and Stephen Kaplan's have a landscape preference theory, which is essentially how humans make sense of their environment and be active in it. And it's essentially a way to organize a landscape where it's kind of like the most comforting. So they have all these theories behind it. And I thought about their theory and how it applies to this. Not that I had this in mind, but I think it's checking off the boxes. Coherence and complexity. You want it to be coherent, but you also don't want it boring. This area is legibility. So you're able to read it. You're able to move through it. This is the navigation part of it. And then the mystery. I lucked out here with this. This path is really cool, how it moves through here. And then what's going on back here? Well, once you pass through this natural screen, then it opens up into my woodland front yard garden. So I just think it's a kind of interesting theory. Here I'm using structural elements used as screens. I like how it builds with the cup plant to the mussel wood. Designing with plants. Basically, I think it's important to think about the different structures of plants and create contrast, combining different variety of flower forms so that it's just more interesting to me. I think structure is a more important component than color, actually. Spires add an interesting contrast against these daisy forms. It's the contrast. Here are the button forms of the rattlesnake master, and the spent flowers of the seed heads of the echinacea are repeating their forms, and they're contrasting with the umbels of this ironweed. It's kind of artsy fartsy, but it's something else to think about when you're thinking about plant choices. This is important. Choose plants with multi-seasonal interests. I think that's important, especially for small gardens. Isn't that cool? Culver's root. They look like Gothic spires. It's kind of, so this is what it's all about for me: function, but also form and function. It's still mystifying to me how you plant these plants and it attracts the local fauna. I'm never going to get bored with this. It's always going to be just magic. And it's so cool that we could put these gardens in our yard. And I have a ritual where every evening I just go out into the garden. I just wander and I observe my garden. And every time there's something new. It's just utterly fascinating. So I just have some pretty pictures to show off those combinations. Predatory wasps are your friends. They'll keep the annoying bugs in place. If anyone has rattlesnake masters, you've probably seen these monsters. They seem really intimidating, but they are docile because they are not from colonies. They are solitary wasps. Finches are one of the few birds that feed their young seeds. I think it's like something like 95 to 96% of the birds feed their babies protein-based caterpillars in the spring, but finches wait for the seeds and they of echinacea and silphiums, for example, in late summer. And look at this. Baby cedar waxwings I noticed on our pagoda dogwood. If I didn't have this garden, I wouldn't have this cool photo. It's so gorgeous. Again, it's just magic to me to be able to live amongst this kind of nature and having it right in your yard. If I were hired today, I'll go through this really quick because I know I'm kind of getting late. How would I prep this yard today? I would minimize soil disturbance, absolutely no rototilling. I would use this, you could use a smothering technique instead, where you use cardboard, but wait at least one season before planting. You could use an herbicide, basically a one and done application, especially on lawn. Less mulch, only 2 inches, one-time application of hardwood shredded mulch. Less irrigation, get yourself a rain gauge and an oscillating sprinkler. How would I design this yard today? Well, I would simplify and balance. I would use less species, but more of them. I would use shorter species with the exception of the natural fence in the back. I would balance the seasonal layer so there's something blooming from spring through fall. Increase the ground layer. There basically wasn't a ground layer at all. And with all that, there would be some more rhythm to it by clumping and drifts. So this is my new design. By the way, these are really great resources for you to figure out how many plants you would need. This plant spacing calculator is great, and the mulch quantity calculator is great. Okay, I would keep the path in place, but I would add a parallel path specifically for the postal carrier. Always keep your postal carriers in mind because they're going to walk through your yard, whether there's a trail there or not. Might as well give them one. And the other cool thing, design-wise, it breaks up your design into quadrants and it's less intimidating. The structural layer of the woodies, I kept the muscle wood because that's such an awesome tree, perfect for that spot. And previously, I don't think I mentioned I had a row of aronia, black chokeberry, but maybe I want a thicker screen even for winter, possibly juniper, eastern red cedar. I'm not sure if that would work. Maybe red osier dogwood because instead of the aronia in this spot, because I just absolutely love those red twigs in the winter times. That contrast against the snow is beautiful. The structural layer of the perennials is what the second thing I plant. And again, I'm repeating a lot of elements. Purple coneflower, purple coneflower, purple coneflower here. Rattlesnake master is just going to be on its own. I'm not repeating that one because it's a small yard. and the digitalis is being repeated. Then I move on to the seasonal layer, and I start with the spring blooming plants. Again, penstemon and digitalis, keep repeating that one. A little bit of spiderwort and prairie phlox peppered throughout. And then the prairie smoke and pussy toes are also early season bloomers. But the reason I'm using them here is to give me some space with the sidewalk and the driveway, so nothing's falling into those areas. Then midsummer drifts, so purple prairie clover, wild petunia. The wild petunia will shoot its seeds all over the place and create its own little ground cover. Later season, Rudbeckia fulgida fix that space from that transition from summer into fall really nicely. But I also threw in some showy goldenrod and sky blue aster tucked away back in here. The base layer is prairie dropseed and golden ragwort. Filler you need. So these plants, the woodies, they're going to take some time to grow and fill in. So in between, I want to have something that's covering the ground because that's our goal. But the challenge here is you want something that can handle the full sun while these woodies are getting established. And then once they fill in, I would prefer to have something that sticks around. So if you can find something that can handle both sun and shade, all the better. And I think wild geranium would work in these conditions. Wild columbine can work, and Carrick's woodii. It'd be an interesting experiment. In this little sliver, we're keeping it thin here with nodding onion and little blue stem and peppered with marsh blazing star. So that is basically it. I want to really quickly show you what's behind the prairie. I'm just going to scroll quickly. In the woodland garden, that's before we started, and this is what 2019. I got a pagoda dogwood back there, a bunch of geraniums, wild geraniums. There's our path is kind of getting eaten up, swelled up by those profuse geraniums. Can't get enough pictures of this dogwood. I love it. Excuse me. Once you walk through that path, you go through this underneath this arbor, which is covered in the native clematis, and then it opens up, excuse me, to this front yard. And this is the reason why we wanted that natural screen, because look at this little oasis we got here. This is the rogue garden I was talking about. I just throw all the aggressive plants in here and let them duke it out. And here are some resources for you. These are some of the books I really like. Some websites. The MNFI site is fantastic, as is the Michigan Flora. I love Hidden Savanna has a great tool for figuring out the correct plants for your conditions. And Illinois Wildflowers is an amazing botany site. Okay, so that's it. Sorry if I pushed it a little too late.
That's okay. If you can stick around for just a little bit, we'll see if anybody has any questions.
Bob, I think there were some questions in the chat. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's we're not really well set up to process those, but I could scroll through.
Some of those were
Slide specific.
Eileen asked about a service berry. Eileen can
I mentioned it because you weren't specifically identifying it as one of these native to the area structural low growth understory plants. I don't know. I just happen to be a fan of the serviceberry, and so I wondered when you use it.
Oh, you're not I love serviceberry because it allows for a lot of you have that understory tree, but
Right.
It's not very thick, and it allows for a lot of sunlight to still penetrate the herbaceous layer. And the birds love it. I love it too.
I think you agree. I think Eileen was saying she loves serviceberry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was gonna say
I'm on two, and I'm thinking
serviceberry.
I'm thinking of adding a whole row of them, and so I'm thinking, well, if these are the right thing to insert in replacing some weed trees and letting some, still having enough light and room to let more native ground covers grow. I'm just trying to get familiar with what are the plants have all sizes to our area, native to our area. And at Service Berry, I've kind of latched onto it, maybe too much so, but it's just one that has worked for me.
I agree. I really love that plant because it just allows you to still have so many other plants around it, just because it's not very dense, you know. And gosh, the berries are so tasty.
Yeah.
Mike, here's a question that is interesting, I think, from Sue McGuire. Are all the plants in your presentation best or basically for drier, well-drained soils?
Okay, so the Chicago garden was like I mentioned, a very rich soil. But when I was talking about, yeah, I guess I should have mentioned a lot of the choices for all of those layers that I was mentioning in there. I didn't really have that in mind, but maybe subconsciously I did because they were a lot of the photos were from my garden in Kalamazoo. So I'd have to go back and take a look at that list. I'm sure they're not all for dry, but
Yeah.
gosh, it's what I mostly work with now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would just, one thing I've noticed, it's been commented on before, but I mean, you started out with mentioning right plant, right place, and that's always kind of, in my mind, a mantra for working with native plants. One
Mhm.
really good source, in my view, for being able to see what plants do well in what kinds of conditions are the catalogs from a lot of our native growers. And we are lucky to have some really wonderful native plant growers in Michigan too,
I
both
agree.
down here and up in Mason. And I don't know what's I'm less familiar on the west side, what there might be, but a lot of the native plant guys put out detailed catalogs that you can see what soil and what light and what season they bloom and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree. That's why I put the Hidden Savanna website on there. I use that for pretty much every project because there's some things I can't remember. I'm like, oh, I forgot about that plant. So you put
Just
in,
some things.
yeah, there's a lot. That's true. And then so yeah, you check the boxes and then it will spit out like, what plants would work in those kind of conditions. It's really helpful.
Right.
Hey, Mike, Christine Golis asks, do you leave inherited plants, peonies, spring bulbs, etc., that
Um,
previous owners may have planted?
It depends on, so for my customers, whatever they want to leave, I'm not going to argue unless I mean, I've even left, if they were really hell bent on keeping what is it, the burning bush, I'll mention that it's invasive, but I'm not gonna tell anyone what to get rid of, I'm adding plants, so I'll work with it. Yeah, in my own yard, there wasn't, both of the yards really didn't have much to get rid of. The one in Chicago, it was basically just lawn and the catalpa trees and some of the Japanese or Chinese yews. I got rid of those. The one in Kalamazoo, same thing. There weren't even any trees there. I don't know why no one ever put a tree on that hot spot, is beyond me, but there's no trees. It was just lawn and lawn on very sandy soil. So they probably watered that baby every day to keep that grass alive. So first, I got rid of most of the grass. I left a lot of paths and I turned off that irrigation system immediately. But yeah, I don't, so far I haven't really had to get rid of some stuff, but I'm not a purist.
That's a good question from Carol Pritchard. You mentioned lack of knowledge about plant behavior when you started out. Now that you are more experienced, have you found a good source of plant sociability, as mentioned by Benjamin Vogue? In other words, what is a good source to find out about how plants play together for instance, you mentioned putting prairie smoke and pussy toes. Prairie smoke and pussy toes need to be by themselves. That's a good question because there's not a lot of information out about plant sociability. I
I
know
agree.
Benjamin Bogue brings that up a lot, but I can't find any reference to it other than maybe it's, you know,
So, yeah, I think about it more with an ecologist mind. Even though I'm not a trained ecologist, I just hang around a lot of good ones. I learn a lot from them. So I'm always thinking about it in terms of natural communities. And I do a lot of work with restoration. So I'm thinking about ecology like during this time of year, working with the Land Conservancy, but I also do my own restoration stuff. So I think about the holistic approach to it, and the best way to learn about that is through this MNFI website. It's through that's through you guys, right? Or is that Michigan State? I think that's
It's Michigan State,
Yeah.
Michigan State. And for
And
people who don't know, MNFI is the Michigan
natural
Natural
features inventory.
Floristic Inventory, I think. And
Michigan Natural, yeah, sorry.
it is a great resource.
Yeah, so that is on their site. There's a really cool map that you could pull up, and you put your address in there, and it will show you what your area looked like, or what the natural community was prior to around 1800. And then from there, you take that information. So for example, it says I was in the Black Oak Barrens. So then with that information, I go to the natural communities page on their website, and I look up Black Oak Barrens, and it gives me a page with all the information about Black Oak Barrens and a plant list. And that plant list, that's your community. You have the sociability that was mentioned. It's all about these ecosystems and the way they were pulled, that they grew together and evolved together for thousands and thousands of years. So I look at that plant list, and I get an idea of what's going to work together based on that ecosystem. Now, everything has been changed pretty drastically, so it's not going to be, it's not like you could go from 2025 to 1800, but it will give you an idea of what plants will fit together close to your conditions.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
also
Bob,
this is the book form of it too. Sorry. Yeah.
No, that's fine. Bob said the name correctly, Michigan Native Features Inventory. And it's MNFI at MSU. We'll find it for you.
Yeah, I know. It's not a short and snappy address, unfortunately.
Mike, Jennifer Barton asks, Mike, do you keep knotting onion away from prairie dropseed? I had a bad experience with knotting onion taking over my dropseed and had to replant. Any suggestions on how to keep other grasses from invading prairie dropseed?
Okay, so knotting onion is a very interesting plant to me because in Chicago, because of the rich soils, it was it was an aggressive plant. I actually didn't like it. I was pulling it a lot. And then, but in Kalamazoo, in the this dry soil, it does well, and it's not aggressive. I know what you mean. I've heard that problem that it reseeds within the prairie dropseed, and I have a feeling that has more of a problem with richer soils, because the knotting onion I've seen hasn't even reseeded at all, which I'm really surprised at, and I think it's because of the nutrient poor soil that I'm dealing with. But also aesthetically, I keep them apart because they look too similar. So naturally, I keep them a little bit apart just for balance. But yeah, it's a good point. I think you should keep them apart.
Yeah, thank you. I have clay soil, so
Ah,
it seeded everywhere.
interesting. Yeah. I love that. I have to use a lot of that plant because we have a deer overpopulation problem, and they don't touch that one. So luckily, it's not an aggressive plant in this area.
What plants in your experience have deer avoided?
They don't like graminoids, so you're really safe with grasses, sedges, and rushes. Anything that has a strong scent to it. So knotty onion, the mints, the penstemons, they don't like the penstemons. Trying to think, they don't like anything really pokey. Obviously, prairie, the cactus, but you guys probably don't deal with cactus over there. They don't like prairie smoke for some reason, or pussy toes, or rattlesnake master. Those are a few that come to mind.
And another question was, can you divide prairie dropseed?
That's interesting. I'm sure you can. I've never done it. Yeah, lately what I've been doing, I just I plant so dense that I'm hoping that I don't have to go back and do any of this stuff. You know what a good resource for that is this book here, Neil Dybel and Hillary Cox's book. Under each species, they talk about whether you can divide or not. And I'm assuming you can with prairie dropseed because it's fibrous roots. Usually the plants you can't divide are the tap-rooted plants. I'm sure it'd be fine. It's really easy to divide sedges, and it's kind of the same root structure. So I'm assuming, yeah.
Let's see if there's any more here. How about, just as I look for more, when you're propagating prairie dropseed, do you spread the seeds like grass seed, or do you use like one seed per cell?
Oh, so this has more. So when it comes to propagating, I leave that to the master, Chad at Hidden Savanna. And basically I am just transplanting plants from his
Okay.
seed into the cell. But when we transfer the prairie dropseed seedlings, we definitely use more than one of those tiny little hairs, because
Yeah.
it's really difficult, man. So we're definitely doing 2 or 3 at a time when we transfer to the cell. Yeah.
Okay.
This has been, I have to say, looking through the chats, we have a really large number of people saying this is great, this is so helpful, this is so beautiful. And thank you very much, Mike, for sharing all this. People who couldn't be on today are also asking left and right about whether this is recorded, and it is, and we'll have to figure out and then get out information for how people can look at the recording. But everyone has really been very eager to hear this, and I think has really enjoyed and appreciated your knowledge and your artistic sense and the inspiration. I'm listening to you and thinking about, oh, that mess I have over there in my yard and over here, but it's motivating to know how good it can be. This has been a treat for all of us, and we're very grateful to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mike.
Have any
Thank
of
you,
your
Mike.
joined
Thank
in?
you.
Wait, what were you
Have
saying?
Carol?
Have any of your neighbors been inspired and joined in this journey?
Yeah, well, in Chicago, it was really funny. My next door neighbor really hated it at first. And then he had some friends come and visit from out of town, and they were gawking all over the garden. And after they left, he's like, how can I get some of your plants in my yard?
Yay!
And then in Kalamazoo, I just happen to live in a great neighborhood where people, almost all of my customers are in my neighborhood. So I'm really my whole block is kind of shifting, and that's exciting to me because my whole plan with the Dropseed businesses, there's a lot of natural areas in Kalamazoo. I was thinking about Ptolemy and how he's all about connecting the dots, and I feel like we have a really good opportunity in Kalamazoo to connect these dots with the natural areas. I also want to mention that I'm giving the same talk, if anyone missed it and want to try, next Monday, online Zoom for the Grand Rapids Wild Ones. So if anyone wants to tune in, I'm not sure what the time, I can't remember.
I'll get that information and
Yeah.
circulate it, because we have had some people who I think missed this talk and didn't want to miss it. So that's great to know.
Great, okay. Yeah, thanks a lot. I'm so glad we were able to make this work instead of canceling, so.
Yeah,
no.
yeah. Everybody drive safely. I guess everybody's home, but
Yeah.
be
nice.
careful when you go out. Again, thanks so much, Mike.
Yeah, thank you. All
Okay.
And thank you, everybody, for joining.
right. Goodbye. How do I do this?